Awesome. Okay, welcome HelpSystems webinars. We love to keep you educated and get information out to you. HelpSystems' goal is to help companies build better IT. And part of that, of course, is getting users onto our server so they can get down to business. Today's webinar is going to be the rise of single sign-on, why IBM organizations are scrapping passwords. So I have a lot of conversations around this. So I'm looking forward to the information that Steve's going to be sharing with us. I am Sandy Moore, and I will be your MC today. I'm going to let Steve be the expert here. I've been working with HelpSystems for over 12 years. Been working on IBMI for about 18. So it's a topic that I hold near and dear to my heart, especially when we start talking about security. And now, Steve, why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself? You're a security guy too.
Yeah, I'm a security guy too. I've been working on the platform since before it was released back on the old system 3836. Did quite a bit of work as an engineer for both storage and power systems over the years, as well as I've been an enterprise architect and a few other things. But I've always been fascinated by security, and I've done that work for quite a while. So I decided I wanted to do that as my full-time gig. So here I am.
Glad you're on board. Appreciate it. Got some good information. All right, well, let's jump into it. I think, we're going to start things out with a poll today. Really find out what exactly you guys are dealing with. And, obviously you've joined us for some information and you must be facing some challenges. So we'd like to know what's your biggest challenge related to passwords. This is, something that I don't think any of us can avoid. We've all got to deal with passwords, whether it's in a management capacity or user capacity. A lot of challenges come up. Users with too many passwords to manage, budget for password synchronization is too high, can't get your password level to 2 or 3 on IBMI, and you have no challenges. And if you have no challenges, I really want your job because it would be a really cush life there. Or maybe you're not sure if you guys have any challenges there. So I don't know. What do you think, Steve? You think
Looks like
people are going to have some challenges?
looks like folks have some challenges. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, all right. Well,
Such
let's
is
see
life,
here.
though.
I know. Yep, we've got some people weighing in here. Got some, yep. All right, so I'm going to give you guys another 30 seconds here to respond if you're going to go ahead and respond to that there. It certainly seems that there are challenges. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and share that, close that poll, share the results. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so Steve, looks like we're looking at most of it. The problems are that users have too many passwords to manage. Some of you guys are not so sure, and then some others. And I'm so happy that nobody said they don't have challenges. Probably wouldn't be here today if that was the case. So, all right. Well, let's kick things off. We want to go ahead and start talking about the problems. If you want to advance your slide there, Steve.
Yep.
Yep. Tell us what the problems are. They've told us what
Okay.
they think it is.
uh, there's a lot of different problems, but those specific to passwords and this is directly out of our poll, is that we have users that have many passwords and many accounts in the enterprise today, and it's I know just with my own, I have probably 40 or 50 password and accounts that I use just in my job from a day-to-day perspective, and it's enough to kind of drive me batty keeping up with those. And these users, they have to remember them, and there are, there's inherent costs to the business for the users to have to remember all these passwords. And and if the users are practicing good password practices, then they're going to have a different password that's totally different from another one password versus one system versus another. So there's this, and this presents some issues or concerns from a security perspective in how our enterprise fares in the world of nefarious actors, both internally and externally to our organization. So and our objective, and from our poll results, is that we want to simplify authentication. We want to make the experience easier for the end user, for them to prove who they say they are. And then the other side of that, as I mentioned, is we want to reduce the operational costs for for managing credentials, and so we can so for those to address some of those cost issues and some of those challenges, there are some common approaches that are implemented to address those concerns. So there's these all basically fall into three different product categories. One, for example, is the Tivoli Identity Manager, which is a user provisioning product. It's a way for us to take a template for a particular role in an organization and create users and a user that's going to blast those out to the various systems that that user needs to get to. But the passwords still have to be maintained either via the identity manager interface or manually, like we've always done it on the platform. The next approach is using Active Directory for authentication. And for example, a single point of authentication. And that relies on the application going directly to Active Directory to validate and affirm that the person is who they say they are. And that's not viable for IBMI and for the most part not AIX either, in that resources on IBMI cannot be authorized using the tree structure of Active Directory, for example. There's not a mechanism that provides that type of authorization to objects on the system. And then the third type of product is password synchronization products. And that's where the user changes their password at this one central location, and then the password is pushed to the various systems that that user has credentials assigned. And there's some challenges with that, and this is something I encounter fairly often, is for some reason or the other, password composition rules aren't always the same across platforms, and user IDs may be different. For example, we often see that in the Windows and IBMI world. Windows IDs pretty much have for all intents and purposes, have an unlimited number of characters. And then on IBMI we have 10. So that can cause issues with password synchronization products needing to have the same user ID across all those platforms. Then, of course, the next next element we need to consider is the availability of the synchronization server and what happens as a fallback if that service happens to not be available in our enterprise. But all of these solutions still depend on passwords. And so though they may streamline our users' ability to manage their passwords, and for us as an organization to manage the passwords, they still depend on them, and those can provide some weak points regarding passwords.
Is there a problem with that? I don't know. I've got problems with passwords, Steve. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I know I have problems with passwords. So users tend to, so we want users to build complex passwords and different complex passwords so that we protect the resources in our organization. But oftentimes complex resources are complex passwords are written down somewhere, and that sort of defeats the purpose of having a secret to validate who you are when you authenticate to a system. I know in my experience, I use a password generator, and it just puts gobbledygook in the password, and then I don't even try to remember what the password is. I use a password store application on my devices so I can remember my passwords. And even not passwords, but if you have the ability to in your organization to use passphrases, uh, those are a bit easier to remember. But having to have different passphrases with different components in them can be complex too. I cannot remember what I had yesterday for lunch, much less 10 different passphrases to get to access the systems I need to get access to, especially those that I don't access but maybe once a month or twice a month. And often we users will implement the same password on multiple systems, and that weakens our ability to protect the data assets and the systems that our organizations rely upon. Because if a nefarious actor can guess one password, then the likelihood they're going to try that password on multiple platforms, just because that's as humans we like to make our lives simple. Then when users may use weak passwords, and even following some password composition rules, you can build weak passwords. Uh, uh, and those passwords are, and those passwords may be out of a dictionary. For example, there are dictionaries of weak passwords and compromised passwords out on the internet. And so users tend to rely on weaker passwords as well when they need to manage so many of them. So you kind of compile all those together, and passwords aren't necessarily the greatest mechanism for our users to authenticate, just because mostly of what we do as human nature. So passwords need to be managed. We got to reset them when the user forgets what the password is, and that involves that individual either going to a self-service portal, or they have to contact the help desk to have that password reset, and then we're engaging help desk personnel to do password resets. So there's quite a bit of effort that's goes into managing just passwords for the business. And often we think about the level of effort as the number of people that are in our organization, when the true level of effort is the total number of credentials that are assigned to all of those individuals within our organizations. So other ways that passwords can be vulnerable is user IDs and passwords when we don't use secure connections to our systems. Even internally, the user ID and passwords are sent in clear text over the network. And that provides us an exposure, an attack surface for both internal and external threats, where that data can be pulled off the network and then leveraged. And we often reuse weak passwords, and I've been guilty of this in previous lives, where I would have this password, and to keep things simple, I would just change a digit in the password so I could remember when I changed it one, and it was enough like the previous password that I wouldn't have to think very hard to be able to remember it. And then there's compromised passwords, and those are those dictionaries, as well as there's a list of favorites, password one or PASSW0RD, things like that. There's several repositories where you can just go out on the internet and grab those passwords and implement them. But there is an alternative. I'm having trouble clicking the right button here.
Yeah, how do we get around those passwords?
Well, for quite a while now, for many years, there's been something called the Kerberos Authentication Protocol. And the Kerberos, it was invented by MIT back in the early days of the internet. And its sole purpose was to be able to authenticate reliably users in an untrusted, unsecured network. It's implemented by many third parties. Active Directory, for example, has the Microsoft implementation of Kerberos in it. On IBM, it's called Network Authentication Service. And then there's various other names on other platforms. But it's widely established and widely accepted, and there is interoperability between platforms using Kerberos. And whether you're aware of it or not, when you log on, for as many years as you've been logging on to the Windows network, you've been using Kerberos. And for example, when you go out to a file share that's assigned to a drive letter on your desktop, when you go to access a file on that server, the Windows machine you're on doesn't prompt you again for credentials, and the reason being is because Kerberos has already authenticated you to that file server, unbeknownst to you. And since this is available to us on IBM, we can use that as a mechanism to replace passwords so that we can eliminate them from our environment, if not in total, to a large degree. So the way it works is, let's say we're at our desk and working on our Windows machine, and we want to start a 5250 session using Kerberos. The Windows system that the desktop we're working from has already been authenticated to the domain controller. So as a process, the Telnet software is configured to use Kerberos, and it reaches out to the Kerberos mechanism on the desktop and says, I want to connect to a particular IBMI system just by its host name. And the desktop client will go and ask the domain controller, do you know about this system, this resource that I want to access? If the domain controller is knowledgeable of that IBMI system, then it's going to create a ticket to allow the user to access that IBMI system. It's going to send that back down to the client, and then the client's going to forward it over to the IBMI system. And the IBMI system is going to read that ticket, and it's going to validate its contents. And if the contents are valid, then it's going to allow you access to the IBMI. Now, when we use Kerberos for authentication, we can actually set the user profile password parameter to *none, and that *none is not nulls or zeros or anything like that. When the password is set to *none, there is no password on the profile. It doesn't exist. Okay, so once authenticated to IBMI, it doesn't know what user profile that you want to use, and this can be really handy when our IBMI user profile is different from our Windows ID. So once we authenticate using Kerberos, a job has not started. So in other words, if you were to go look at work active jobs, you wouldn't see a Telnet session being established. You wouldn't see any job activity, because in authentication, it only is validating you are who you say you are when you access the system. And even if the Windows ID and the IBM ID are the same, the IBMI still doesn't know what user profile that you want to use. So the next component of single sign-on is enterprise identity mapping. And its sole purpose is to perform that mapping of the Windows ID to the IBMI user profile. And that is one Windows ID to one IBMI user profile. That's the relationship. And all these mappings are contained in a single repository. And that is really nice. So if I got 20 systems in my environment, and I have a production system that stays up most of the time, then that's probably where I'd want to put my EIM repository. Then when users are leveraging single sign-on to access any IBMI system that's in my network, then they're going to go to when a person authenticates, they're going to go to that one production system with the repository to understand what profile that should be assigned to the authenticated user to start the IBMI jobs. And one nice thing about it is if you got 20 systems and 90% of your users access 5 systems, then we can, within the EIM, we can group those systems together and assign them as one element instead of assigning 5. So that can ease the administration resource requirements by lessening the number of entries we need to maintain in the enterprise identity mapping repository. Okay, so what does it take to enable SSO? And there's basically there's three basic steps, and they are: we configure the IBMI so that it becomes a member of the Windows domain, so that it can be recognized as a resource when a request comes from the client system to the Windows domain to access a particular IBMI system. It also allows the IBMI system to verify the Kerberos ticket that's sent to it from the client system, so that it can validate that the user is who they say they are. The next thing that we do is we configure EIM to map the Windows ID to the IBMI user profile. And we would need to do that for each one of the participants from our organization that we want to leverage single sign-on. And then the last step is to configure the clients to use Kerberos instead of a profile and a password. So just like SSL and TLS, those security protocols, the usage of Kerberos is dependent on the client starting the connection to IBMI or any other system for that fact, requesting it be that Kerberos be employed to provide the authentication to the IBMI. So the way it works is we'll pick up here. So we get the ticket from the domain controller, and that Kerberos ticket is forwarded on to IBMI for it to authenticate who we say we are. And then Kerberos passes the Windows ID and the Windows domain and the target IBMI system to EIM, and EIM looks up in its database to find a match for those 3 elements, and it would find a IBMI user profile to assign to jobs that are started by this attempt to connect to the system. And then from that point on, EIM hands off the user profile to, as in our scenario, start a telnet session. And from then on, everything looks just like it does today when we use user IDs, user profiles, and passwords. So you might ask, well, how do we modify our clients to be able to use Kerberos? Well, in ACS, Access Client Solutions, you launch ACS and you go into System Configuration, and you go to the Connection tab and you select Use Kerberos Authentication, Do Not Prompt. And when we do that, for example, in the case of our telnet session, we will start the connection, and the next thing we'll see is the menu, or the menu as a result of the initial program that's assigned to the user profile, pop up on our screen. So we won't see a user profile prompt. We won't see IBMI sign-on screen, nothing. The user's next experience is to be active in whatever application or function that their profile would normally take them to while using a user ID and password. Now, the nice thing about single sign-on, it is not an all or nothing proposition. You can some users can participate in single sign-on, and other users within the enterprise can still use user profiles and passwords. One quick example that I can think of that some of our customers have this scenario is the corporate personnel will use single sign-on, but if they have a warehouse, they will continue to use their passwords and IDs, especially for things like RF guns and those types of things that aren't yet enabled for Kerberos, or because of the person's role, they don't have a Windows ID in Active Directory. Do we have another polling question, Sandy?
We do, absolutely. This one actually is related to single sign-on. So what we're talking about here, let me launch that. Kind of wondering if you guys are obviously sitting in for more information on this and trying to figure out if you've actually considered implementing single sign-on for IBMI. It's a tool that, obviously can be very helpful, and certainly something that can help organizations manage those passwords or get rid of the bulk of them. So wondering if you've already implemented it, if you're looking at it in the next 6 months, if you're already considering it, haven't thought about it, or not so sure. So, sounds like a tool. Steve, I've learned more about this between our practice session and today. I'm actually understanding it better. I really appreciate you sharing this information with us. So,
Oh, my
very
pleasure.
awesome. Yeah. So you only have to hit me with that book a couple of times before it starts to sink. So, all right. Looks like we've got users. Looks like everybody is rolling in that vote there, and we're going to go ahead and close that there. Unless you guys have one last second there, if you want to go ahead and respond, you are welcome to. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that, and I'm actually going to share. So, looking at what is going on, looks like we've got 20% of our attendees today have already implemented it. Looks like we've got a small contingency here that are working on it in the next 6 months, and half of you guys are actually already considering it. So kudos. I know it's something we've got to start looking at. A couple of you have not started considering it yet, and a couple people on the fence still. So about what we expect there, Steve. That
Yep.
means they're thinking about it. That's good.
Yes.
Cool. Well, let's tell people if there's something we can do to help, because it sounds like it might be a little bit of a daunting task, and figuring out how to get this done. Can we help them?
Sure.
Yay.
So we have a single sign-on managed service, and it comes in three components. First of all is implementation, and we help you do all the configuration, walk you through it step by step to get all of those things that I mentioned in the previous slides, the getting IBMI into the Windows domain, setting up the EIM server. We help you do a mass load of your users into the EIM repository. And we also talk about how do you handle SSO in your HADR scenario, and based upon what your process is for failover is, we can set you up and so that you can be successful when you need to do those types of functions in your environment. And then we also take you through how to care and maintain the EIM repository and SSO going forward, as well as give you some pointers on common issues, how to diagnose them, and how to resolve them. Then we have then the second component of that is, and these are all individual, by the way, is we have the managed service component, which is a subscription based, and it provides a number of hours per each EIM domain to allow you to reach out to us when you have problems, in concerns, or expansion of the SSO environment onto other systems, as well as we take a look at your SSO environment each year to see if we can find more ways of leveraging it in your environment, or just streamlining based upon any kind of changes that were made in your organization. And then the third component is we have a piece of software in the HelpSystems portfolio that is an RPA software called Automate, and we have developed a bot that will actually maintain the EIM repository for you based upon the users in Active Directory being a member of a security group. So whenever someone's added to that security group, it will create the EIM repository entries for you, and when someone's removed, it will remove the EIM repository entries. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that if the EIM repository entry does not exist and a person doesn't have a password, then they're not going to get on the system. There's not a way for them to be able to do that. So if you have a significant number of onboarding and offboarding as a part of your organization, then the bot could be handy in alleviating the maintenance of the EIM repository. And Sandy, I think you had something you wanted to add onto that, right?
Yeah, so one of the things we were talking about is want to make sure that this also goes hand in hand with using multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, but also ensuring, as we talked about, that we've got users that connect to the system that may not be going through single sign-on. So authenticating that those administrative users we're routing around that, definitely be able to make sure that we're validating that they are who they say they are and that they are the user with the credentials and it's really them. So, it's definitely, not a one thing fits everything. We've got layers, and making sure that we're tackling every issue that can come up with that.
So I think we're ready to open it up for questions, correct?
Yeah. I think we can take some questions here. So we've got quite a few questions actually. So let's actually, I'm going to throw one out here at you, Steve, and if you need to lob it over the fence and reply later, we can certainly do that.
Sure.
All right, so I got one here. It says, when using SSO, can SQL viewpoint be used with local password management equals no? Not sure if you're familiar with SQL viewpoint and where that comes into play there.
No, I'm not intimate with that project, with that product, so we can certainly get an answer for for that
Absolutely, yeah.
question.
SQL Viewpoint's a HelpSystems product, so certainly be happy to do some internal testing there and see where that relationship would land. So, all right, so we'll get back to you on that one there. Let's see, another question. Is there a prescribed way to easily authenticate to get a Kerberos certificate or ticket for service accounts that typically do not first authenticate to Windows or Kerberos?
No, the requirement is that the particular account needs to have a account defined in Active Directory. So for service accounts, generally you would those profiles on your system would retain passwords.
Gotcha. All right. Let's see here. If you have a problem after configuring SSO, can I change the IBM profile password in the client to point to their IBM profile to get them working?
So if you recall, when we were looking at the configuration for ACS, to revert back to passwords, the system or telnet sessions would just need to be reverted back to use user profile and password, because it's the client that requests to use Kerberos or a single sign-on.
Okay. All right. And Josh, if that didn't answer your question completely, feel free to shoot over another one. We can also take that offline if we need to get further in depth there. All right. Lots of questions here. I don't think we're going to end up getting to them all, but let's try it. When using Kerberos, does the password have to be set to *none, or is that it can be set to *none?
Yes, setting the password to *none is not a requirement. For example, administrators may want to leverage single sign-on for their daily activities, but retain their password in the event that the single sign-on becomes unavailable because of their role in the organization. However, if you're looking for a value proposition with single sign-on, the elimination of those passwords is the return on investment for the effort of implementing SSO.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. All right. How do you know if your application is Kerberos enabled?
We recommend, so for things like ACS, for example, and even the old IBM Access for Windows is Kerberos enabled. We recommend that you go back to the software provider and inquire of them if they support Kerberos, because it may not be intuitive based upon what options you see in configuring the application. It may be that there are changes that are required in files to enable Kerberos that wouldn't necessarily be seen up front. But anything that uses green screen or ACS type functions, those are going to be Kerberos enabled or SSO enabled by default. Enable a bull, I should say.
That's a good word. It's hard to say. All right. Let's see here. We'll probably do a couple more, and then we'll make sure that if we haven't answered your questions, we'll take it offline here. All right. What if you have multiple IBMI profiles which differ from network profile?
Well, I'll address that in two ways. If it's two profiles on the same IBMI system, the SSO in and of itself can only map one Windows ID to one IBM I user profile. We do have customers where the users within the organization sometimes have multiple roles and they need multiple user profiles. In that case, we recommend to use take the profile that is used most frequently and put that in single sign-on. Now, there are ways to manage multiple IBM I profiles on the same system with SSO, but that requires some coding and development on your system to make that something that can be a reality. If you're talking about on different systems, the EIM repository would have a mapping of a Windows ID to different profiles on different systems. So if your user profile is different on between system A and system B, then EIM can handle that perfectly fine.
Awesome. Makes sense. All right. Thank you. All right. You know what? I think we are getting pretty close here to the top of our time. I think we promised we were going to do this about 30 to 45 minutes, and I think we're right about there. So if we didn't get your question, we will follow up on those and make sure that we are addressing them. Unless, Steve, you wanted to tackle anything else. Otherwise, I think we will just say thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. The recording will be available as well as the handout on it with the slide deck. So any last words of wisdom there, Steve?
No, SSO can be a really great thing, and most of our customers who have implemented that have found that it relieves some pressure from their administration and help desk staff, as well as their users. Really like the ability to just start that session up and pop right into the application.
Yeah, sounds pretty amazing. I'm glad I got to learn a little bit more about it and looking forward to future information on it. So great. All right. Thanks, everybody, for your time. We really appreciate it. Steve, as always, good to talk with you. And I hope everybody stays safe and healthy out there, and no more passwords. All right. Take care, everyone. If you have any other questions, feel free to shoot us an email, info@helpsystems.com. Visit our website at www.helpsystems.com.